Hi everyone. Let's actually see if this is actually working. Yay. Okay. Good afternoon everyone, or good morning. My name is Danai Nyagani and I'm 24 years old. I was originally born in Zimbabwe, but I've lived in Joburg for practically half my life, so I consider myself a Zimbabwean South African. Today I'll be facilitating the session on the Africa We Want. Africa Matters approached me a couple of weeks ago asking me if I would be interested in sort of giving my opinion about the Africa that I wanted and sort of how I would like to sort of see this Africa. And yeah, so with regarding to the direction of Africa, I think all of us, especially young people, have sort of realized that we have a lot of work that we still need to do. I think just based off my personal experience and my work experience as well, we have a lot of young people who are very eager, very excited about the future, but unfortunately their ideas aren't necessarily materializing. And so I'm hoping through this discussion that we'll be able to share ideas, inspire each other, motivate each other, because I think like we all say that we are the Africa that we are waiting for. We are the people that we are waiting for. And I think if we don't take this time now to actually share ideas and perspectives, we will never be able to live in the Africa that we actually want. Regarding the things that I'd like to see in the next 10 years in Africa, as someone who's very passionate about mental health, I would really love to see, you know, young African people having more accessibility to mental health facilities. Specifically, I would actually like to see that there is, either a psychologist or a therapist in every clinic in all countries in Africa. I think this is very important because I think as young people we go through a lot. Trying to make a name of yourself, in the workspace, also trying to sort of juggle your work and your life aspects of yourself, trying to live up to your own as well as your parents' expectation. I think that has a lot of weight on you as a person. And I think that if people had more accessibility to people like therapists and counselors within their communities, you wouldn't necessarily see a lot of young people suffering in silence. I also think that for a very long time, mental health hasn't been, hasn't been on the agenda point. And I think that we as young people are actually starting to realize how important it is for us to actually look after ourselves, not only physically, but also mentally, because I think if we want to, fulfill our dreams, we also need to be in a space where we can actually do that. And I think if we are, not in the right state of mind, I think that thing contributes to us not actually reaching our dreams as well. I also think that mental health is as important as physical health, for lack of a better word. And I think that for many people that are ill or who have various forms of illnesses and diseases, at some point in time their mental health is actually affected. And I think it's all good and well for us and for our governments to actually treat physical ailments, but if we don't actually heal the mind as well, we're not actually doing much. I think in terms of youth employment, I recently read a stat about how youth unemployment in South Africa has actually increased to 55.2, which is ridiculous, if I say so myself. Because for a very long time, especially when I was growing up, I was told by my parents that if you go to school, if you work very hard, if you go to university, you're guaranteed a job. And I think as a person who, for the first 3 months after I left university, I struggled to find a good paying actually a job actually. And I think that we must be very, very careful when we tell young people, no, go to school, you'll get a job, because as we see now, that's not actually a reality. That's not actually something that's actually happening. And I think that we as young people need to sort of sit down and actually ask ourselves, what are we actually doing to ensure that our fellow colleagues and our fellow, young people are actually getting employed? Because we can't necessarily rely on, big corporations and big companies to take us as employers. Similarly, for those that have started their own successful jobs and businesses, I think it's very important for us to then share the knowledge and share the journey that you've taken in order to make your company successful. Because I think now more than ever, companies aren't hiring people, and young people are now resorting to coming up with creative and innovative ways to make ends meet. And I think that as a young person, it's very important for me to actually ensure that like my fellow friends and my colleagues who are also young people are able to provide for themselves and provide for their families. And I think the high rate of youth unemployment in South Africa and Africa as a whole also contributes to the mental health of young people, because imagine not being able to to provide for your family, or not being able to provide for yourself. That is something that does weigh on you as a young person, because you start doubting yourself. You start thinking, what, maybe I should have done this, or maybe I should have done that, or maybe if I go into drugs, that is something that will get me money, because it's considered to be an easy way to sort of generate money. But I think if us as young people are able to band together and actually say, okay, look, you know what, this is a company that I started, these are the experiences that I've gone through, and actually share that, I think the unemployment rate in Africa can actually start to decrease. But I think the reason why it's remained so high, I know that there's a lot of factors that contribute to youth unemployment, but I think one of the biggest one is that us as young people aren't actually sharing ideas with each other, or aren't actually sharing our experiences in terms of starting up companies and businesses. And we're not even giving each other a chance through either support or by sharing opportunities with each other. I think as young people, sometimes we are very stingy when it comes to knowledge, especially when someone has gone to university and someone hasn't. It almost feels as if those that have gone to university, or those that have undergone certain experiences, those are their experiences to keep, and they don't necessarily share them with everyone else. And I think that we need to sort of get out of that mentality and actually start sharing all the information that we get, sharing all the experiences that we go through, because we never know who might actually benefit from that. And I think as a young person, one of the things that I really do want to see is that Africa consumes 50%. Africa consumes 90% of the stuff that it actually makes, that we don't necessarily rely on materials and services that are produced overseas, but we are actually able to provide and create products for ourselves that we actually use for ourselves. I think that not only partially solves the issue of unemployment in Africa, but we actually get to generate our own money and actually keep the wealth within Africa, and not necessarily spread that to the rest of the world. And I think the last thing that I really want to see in Africa is our education system to be improved to the point where you don't necessarily need a degree in order to be considered a well-educated person, for example. Reason is that a lot of the stuff that our brothers and sisters, our younger brothers and sisters, are learning in school are things that are very Western orientated. For example, you could ask a young person, who is the president of the United States, and they'll be able to mention the last, for example. If you were to ask a young person, where's Cape Verde or where's Eritrea, and ask them to point it out on the African map, they won't necessarily know where that is. And I think that part of the reason why some of Africa's problems have continued to exist is because our education system doesn't empower young people to actually think of African solutions to African problems. I think that a lot of the stuff that we are taught is very westernized, and I also think that it allows us to adapt to a more Western environment, but it doesn't necessarily help us fix some of the issues that are at home. I'm not saying that we should disregard everything that comes from Europe or America, but what I'm simply saying is that we need to emphasize a lot more African history, for example. I think that in 10 years specifically, I hope to see young people to be able to mention at least 10 African presidents. I hope to see young people to be able to know all the countries in Africa, because I think that it's very important that we actually know who we are, and not necessarily focus on ourselves or people that aren't necessarily from Africa, because I think if we are unable to sort of recognize ourselves and believe in ourselves and value ourselves, we can't exactly expect the rest of the world to do the same. And I think that is something that comes from education. Secondly, when I speak of education, I'm not talking about formal education. I know that there's a lot of knowledge that exists outside of the confines of a classroom, and I think that is something that we also need to then highlight and emphasize and celebrate. Most Africans come from backgrounds where storytelling is part of their identity. Histories and family stories are passed down through narratives and storytelling, and I think that we are at a tipping point where if we do not cherish that, and if we do not preserve the process of actually sharing stories with each other, we might actually lose it, to the point where our children's children will not be able to narrate their own history. And I think that is something that we need to consciously and continuously do. There is a lot of value that people get from sharing stories and understanding where they come from, and I think that is something that we need to highlight and preserve and protect, because there are some stories that you can't that you won't be able to fully understand through Twitter or through an essay. Those stories need to be told in person in a particular way, and I think that is one of the tasks that we have as young people, is that we have entered a very technological generation, whereby where we actually express most of ourselves through social media. But I think that we are also a very fortunate generation whereby we've actually undergone, or we've benefited from storytelling from our parents and our grandparents, and I think that is something that we actually need to preserve and actually pass on to our future children as well. I think as a young person, I believe that the role that young people play in ensuring that Africa actually succeeds is very multidimensional. I think that certain young people sort of play a key role in certain spaces, in certain contexts. But I think as a young person, I believe that we are in a very unique position, because one, we actually determine the future of this continent. We are able to sort of look at the mistakes that our parents and our grandparents made in the past, and we are able to rectify them. I think the challenge that we then have is that we need to actually rectify it, because it's all good and well to simply say that, look, if the system works, then nothing needs to be changed. If it isn't broken, why fix it? But I think as young people, we need to start questioning the way things are, or the reason things happen the way that they do, in order to actually fix it. I think that Africa has, as a whole, has gone through a lot. I think that given our very painful past, I think we are in a very unique position as young people to sort of change that and use that to actually ensure that the future that we actually see is the future that we actually live in. I think, like I was saying earlier, in terms of like knowledge transfer, us as young people need to ensure that we are able to absorb all the knowledge or absorb ideas from wherever we can, and then pass it on to our fellow peers, colleagues, because I think that knowledge that remains in one space isn't actually knowledge. It remains useless if it's not shared with other people. And I think that especially for young people who maybe aren't as fortunate enough to, either attend formal education or aren't as fortunate enough to sort of have large networks, I think it's important for us to actually share that and share the knowledge that we actually get from, formal education in our networks. Because I think while the information or the knowledge that I get may not benefit me now, I definitely know for a fact that it will benefit someone else. And I think that us as young people shouldn't be selfish with our knowledge. We shouldn't be selfish with actually guiding each other and providing support for each other, because if we don't do it, we can't expect anyone else to do it as well. And so I think it's very important that in whatever we do, we always ensure that we are actually empowering each other, because I think that is the only way that we'll be actually be able to get to where we want to be. I also think that we aren't actually challenging each other in terms of our ideas. So what you might find is that within a group of friends, for example, you might all have the same desires to, travel the world, for example. And we are very quick to sort of accept what we hear as the truth, for lack of a better word. So for example, if, I were to tell my friend, hey, you know what, I'm actually doing fine, my friend will just accept it as me just doing fine and not necessarily go deeper in terms of asking, what is it that is actually going on. And I think that us as young people aren't challenging each other enough. We are simply taking what is being said as at face value at times. And I think that for us as young people, if we really want to advance Africa to the point where we can actually say, look, this is the Africa that I've actually dreamt of, it's important that we actually push each other and challenge each other, and ensure that the things that we're actually doing them for the right reasons. I think that it's also very important that we are actually honest with each other when we share our experiences in terms of creating businesses and opportunities, because I think we live in a society where on social media people always want to portray the best of themselves, which is fine and totally acceptable. But I think also we need to be honest in terms of the journey that we took in order to get to the point where we can actually post something positive about ourselves. And I say this because I as a person have always had business ideas. I've always thought of, oh look, here's a space, and I have this really cool idea, and this idea can actually fulfill that space. But I've always seen people start their businesses and actually become successful, but I've never been able to see the journey that they've actually taken. And so for me, as a person who has ideas, it makes it a lot difficult to actually understand the work that actually goes into it, because from the outside it looks very easy. It looks like, you woke up one morning, you came up with this idea, 2-3 years later you were very silent, but you came out and your business is very successful. But I actually don't know the challenges or the hardship that you actually went through. And I think that is something that young people sort of need to share with each other, because I think in doing so, you are able to then say to people, look, you have your ideas, implement them. This is the journey that waits ahead of you, but don't also be discouraged by it, because at least now you know that these are the hurdles that I might encounter. And I think if we were to actually do that, a lot of some of the issues that Africa currently faces will actually be solved. So for example, if people were to be more open about their career journeys or business journeys, for example, I would be more motivated to actually implement some of the ideas that I have. And in doing so, I can then inspire other people to then do the same as well. I think as a whole, young people, I think we have a lot of value to add. And I think that the only thing that is actually holding us back is the fact that none of us want to start. We're always waiting for the next person to actually start the initiative or to actually start, the implementation of the idea. And I think that we need to also, when we say that we want to see something, we need to actually actively work towards actually making that thing a reality. I think it's all very nice for us to, be very vocal on social media, but if we're not actually going out and doing the work, then, our words don't actually mean anything. And I think that it's important for us as young people to be both vocal on social media, but then also do the work on the ground as well. So three of the questions that I got from Africa Matters had to do with Afrophobia, the work that I'm actually doing to make sure that the Africa that I envision is the Africa that I actually get to live in, as well as how do we make an inclusive Africa. In terms of Afrophobia and sort of how do we get rid of Afrophobia in Africa, I think it's a very simple and yet complicated solution for me. Simple in that I think the only thing that we actually have to do is sit down and engage with each other. One of the reasons why all of these stereotypes actually exist is because people don't take the time to actually find out if what they've heard about other countries is actually true. So, for example, I was born in Zimbabwe, and obviously when I moved to South Africa, I'd obviously heard some of the stereotypes that were going around about people who come from Zimbabwe, and for a very long time I was very private about actually who I was and where I came from, and so I would manage to avoid telling people my nationality because I was very scared that people would judge me in a certain way. It was only sort of after engaging with a couple of people that I then realized that no, the reason why people have these stereotypes is because they actually don't know. And people are too scared to actually ask, is this something true? Is this something that actually happens? And I think because of that, people continue to have stereotypes about foreign nationals, especially in South Africa. I think if we are serious about getting rid of Afrophobia in Africa, we, one, need to question all of the stereotypes that we've ever heard about every foreign national. I think that stereotypes come from a place of unknown. It comes from a place of not knowing sort of the truth, and because sometimes people are scared to actually go up and question and find out, they would rather actually keep the stereotype, keep perpetuating the stereotype. And I think that it's very important for us to, one, actually engage with each other and not simply ask, where are you from, or, what is your culture all about, but actually genuinely have an interest in who we are and the identities that all of us carry. Because I think that it's the genuine part, the genuine part of actually having the conversation that would actually make a difference. I also think that, people shouldn't believe everything that they hear. I know that the media plays a large role in sort of perpetuating some of these stereotypes, and I think that we all know that the media doesn't always get it right 50% of the time, and so it's very important for us to actually engage with each other and find out from each other the things that are actually going on in each other's cultures, and sort of get a better understanding of their identities, because I think that is something that will also then ensure that we don't just perpetuate all these stereotypes that we hear on a daily basis. In terms of creating an inclusive Africa. One of the way that the question was phrased was that Africa is a diverse continent in terms of race, gender, sexuality, religion, and culture. How do we achieve inclusion in such a diverse land? This is a question that I asked my friend, I think 6 months ago, and we had a very interesting discussion. We were talking about gender, and I'd asked him, you know, many of our cultures sort of perpetuate a very patriarchal point of view, and how do we sort of ensure that our cultures are inclusive of women, but also how do we then make sure that we don't actually lose the essence of our culture? And we had a very long and robust debate about it. We actually didn't get to a conclusion because he was saying that, look, culture is there for a reason. Culture helps us, create our identity. Culture helps us navigate the world. And I was saying to him that culture is, created by people, and people obviously change, and surely then culture should accommodate that as well. And it's a question that I still struggle with because of the fact that Africa is so diverse. I don't think that there is one answer to it. I think that I actually don't have an answer to that, and I think that I would like to pose it to everyone and sort of find out what their perspectives are on it. Because like I said, we are here to share ideas, perspectives, and actually answer each other's questions. So that is a question that I pose to you. Please, can you comment, and let's actually start a dialogue on this. And lastly, in terms of what do I actually do in order to ensure that the Africa that I dream of is the Africa that I get to live in. I am very fortunate enough to work for two amazing organizations that actually aim to see young people flourish in the future. So my 9-to-5 job is I am a training and development coordinator for a joint venture between a company named Aurum and Unlocked. And basically what they are trying to do is that they are trying to stop the spread of HIV and AIDS through youth employment. And what my role is as the training and development coordinator is that I provide all the training content for the interns to engage on, and just to ensure that, when the interns actually enter their job spaces, that they are in a more empowered position, that they have a greater understanding of their role in ensuring that HIV and AIDS actually ends in our generation. My 9 to 5, my 9 to 9, my evening job, for lack of a term, is that I am the intern project manager for the Youth Development Leadership Program for Africa Matters. And I think through those two positions, I've actually been able to get a better understanding of young people in Africa, but also get a better understanding of the potential that young people actually have. And I think the thing that makes me get up and actually go to work is the fact that I know that that I'm in a position to actually create opportunities for young people, but also I'm in a position to empower and actually learn from young people in terms of how they're creating opportunities for themselves. And so I think my role sort of contributes to my dream of actually seeing Africa as a continent that is, young people, that promotes young people and that celebrates young people. I see that through the work that I actually do. Young people are very keen, young people are very eager to take up opportunities, and I think that the work that we're doing as young people is actually evident, it's showing, and I think that we should continue doing the good work that we're doing because we are the ones that we're waiting for, and we are the ones that determine our future. Yeah, so what I'm going to do is that I'm going to answer a couple of questions, and if you have any particular question that you want to ask me, please feel free to add it in the comment section. And thank you so much also for setting some time aside to actually listen to my thoughts and my contribution, and also for the people that are commenting. Thank you so much for actually challenging me and providing your own perspective, because I think that it's not very easy to be honest in terms of what you're actually thinking and what you're actually feeling, especially when we live in a sort of society where every word that people have is sort of scrutinized to the nth degree. So I really do appreciate for the people that are commenting, and I do encourage other people to comment as well. So Farai asked, how can we use social media to have a full and holistic engagement and dialogue amongst the youth? I think the fact that the youth is very involved in social media sort of gives us an advantage in that we are able to then have such robust conversations with a diverse group of young people. I think the challenge that we then have is actually encouraging young people to use the platforms to have those robust engagements. I think for the most part, young people are using social media to sort of highlight, aspects of their lives, which is good. But I think that there is a lot of potential in actually having young people engage and have stimulating debates on issues like how do we then create an Africa that we want to see in the future. So I think that it's not necessarily about having young people be on social media, but it's about like attracting young people to the conversations, because I think some young people don't necessarily enjoy having conversations like this. I mean, some young people find these types of conversation boring or bland, but they need to find a way to actually attract young people to these kinds of platforms and conversations and show them the importance of actually having a conversation like this. Hope that answers your question. I think one thing that we actually should have is a conversation on sort of othering people. And when I speak of othering, I mean othering, everyone in its sort of the broad sense of the word. Reason being is that is something that I think a lot of us have experienced, but none of us, or a few of us, have actually had the conversation. And so I think that this is, a conversation that needs to be had. I'm hoping that if I'm awarded the opportunity to have to present on this platform again, I'll be able to speak a bit more about othering. But I also then encourage Farai to then approach Africa Matters and ask if she can then give the presentation on othering, because I think that it's very important that we actually hear from each other, and that we don't necessarily have the same people sharing the same experiences, because I think there are many of us that go through this experience, and I think that it's very valuable and very important that we allow for other people to actually share their experiences. So, I've just read the question on young people in Africa having very little political engagement in and amongst themselves. It's a question that I actually haven't thought about a lot, to be very honest. I think partially because I surround myself with people who are who sort of are aware of the political landscape that we live and I'm someone that actually enjoys politics and is somewhat interested in it. So I've actually never thought about it. I'll think about it and get back to it. So in terms of the platform that AMI provides for young people to sort of engage on topics like this, so Africa Matters currently has three main programs. So it's the African Leadership Program, African Leadership Development Program, sort of which is aimed at developing the skills of young people and also just empowering them with knowledge and tools that they need in order to create, sort of either create their own businesses, to advance some of the ideas that they have, or some of the solutions that they actually have. We also then have the School Leadership Development Program, which is one that I find to be very important. It essentially instills, necessary leadership skills amongst young learners, and sort of, makes them see the value and the importance of them actually taking up various leadership positions in order for them to actually to see the value in in the contribution that they actually have in advancing Africa as a continent. I think as a young person who was once in school, one of the things that I was fortunate enough to have is opportunities to actually exercise my leadership abilities and skills. I've also realized that is an opportunity that not everyone has, and the School Leadership Development Program actually allows for that. So we go to all schools in South Africa, but we're actually hoping to branch out in the rest of Africa. But we actually go into the schools and we, speak to young people about what is the meaning of being a young person? Like, what is your role in society, and how can you contribute to ensuring that Africa gets the place that it needs to be? And then the last program that that Africa Matters has is the Ambassadorship Program, and so we ask young people from countries all over Africa to to be ambassadors for the program. And essentially what they get out of it is that they get to engage with each other, because one, it is very difficult for young leaders to find spaces where they can actually engage each other on topics and ideas that they have. The ambassadorship program also then allows young leaders from around Africa to then receive different perspectives on topics like leadership, topics like gender, because I think we all come from different communities, and I think it's very important that we actually share those ideas and knowledge. The ambassadorship program also encourages young people from different countries to realize their leadership potential. I think that if you're a young person for example, from Kenya, and you see that there's a young person who is representing Kenya on in the ambassadorship program, you're also more likely to want to find out more about becoming an ambassador, but also wanting to actually link up with that ambassador, because you might have some ideas that you want to share, ideas that you want to collaborate. And so the ambassadorship program also then helps young people link to other young people. And so those are the three programs that we currently have. I would strongly advise everyone to check out Africa Matters page as a whole, but also check out their website at www.africamattersinitiative.co.za, and you can actually get a lot more information about the programs that they have. If you would like to collaborate with Africa Matters at some point, I strongly advise you to either inbox them on any of our social media pages, or you can email us at info@africamattersinitiative.org. Yeah. How do we then continue the conversation after this webinar? I thoroughly encourage people to continue to have conversations on the event page itself. But I also encourage young people to have this conversation amongst their friends. Like I said earlier, it's all good and well for us to share this space with each other and like share the knowledge and the experiences that we have. But if we don't share it with everyone else, then it doesn't mean anything. So it's very important that for those that have viewed this webinar to actually go out and have these conversations with their friends, with their colleagues, with their family members. I know that us as young people are very scared to actually have conversations or debates with our family, and I think that we should actually stop doing that because we are denying ourselves the opportunity to actually learn. So it's very important that we actually get off of social media and actually have these conversations, with our networks. Yeah, if there are no other questions, I'd firstly like to thank Africa Matters for giving me this opportunity to actually speak to everyone and to share my perspective and opinions about the direction of Africa, where I'd like to see Africa, and sort of the things that we need to do in order to get there. I secondly would then like to thank everyone for tuning in. I think that this has been very informative. I also thank everyone for asking all the questions that they did. There are some questions that I never thought about that I am now going to think about. And I'm hoping that throughout the week and the coming months and the coming years that we are able to then continue to have this conversation. For those that saw very interesting comments on the comment page, I encourage you to also then have the conversations with the person that you found to be stimulating, because I think it's very important that we actually start having robust conversations with people that we find interesting, and not necessarily just thank them and appreciate them for their comment, but we actually then delve deeper and actually understand how do they come up with a question, from what perspective they're talking about, because you never know what you might actually learn from it. Yeah, thank you so much, everyone. Hope you have a great evening and continue having the conversations in your private spaces. Bye.